Are we complete? I think so. Welcome everybody. I think this is our third, if I'm not mistaken, inspirational session here in our digital studio arena. Glad to have you all around, and also a special welcome to our visitors online via the webcam. Today we have Dr. Roeland Dietvorst, and he will tell to us about helping organizations make better decisions. And I try to remember this, but it's very difficult, so I will read it from the brochure that we spread all over the company. Understanding and predicting consumer and employee behavior. The root of our decisions lies beneath the surface. To help understand what really drives our choices, neuroscientific research and optimization tools help brands achieve their goals. It sounds very complicated to me, so I would love and like to learn more. So, Roeland, thank you for joining us, and looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much for the invitation. So, I'm very much passionate about how people make decisions, and I think decisions make up a great part of who you are and what shapes you in your own life and your career choices, etc. But the funny thing is that there's a huge gap between what people think drives their behavior and the actual reasons for their behavior. If you want to understand something about persuasive communication, about sending a message, the first thing you need to realize is sending a message is the easy part. But having a strategic package message that will also affect behavior, that's the next step. And that's a pretty far leap forward in trying to grasp the effects that drive behavior. So there's not a lot of scientific examples about internal communication in organizations about how to be persuasive. So I have to borrow some of our research towards consumers. But we as a company, we always focus on the decision process and how a brain processes information and how this information is valued inside the brain and leads to decision making. And to understand something, it's also important to understand something about animal cognition. And there was this famous researcher, and he was trying to understand how far you can go, what would happen if you would raise a baby chimpanzee in his own family next to his own young child, and see how far he could get this experiment and how human-like he could create a chimpanzee, how human-like he could become. Well, he quickly stopped the experiment. It was not because the chimpanzee was not becoming human-like, it was because his own child was becoming very chimpanzee-like. So that's also a little bit of a wake-up call to understand what is it really beneath the surface, what's in our DNA. And I'm pretty famous for taking a detour, making my point. So if you think, now, Roeland, you're going too far, this has got nothing to do with the challenge today, please let me know. You can interrupt me during this talk at any moment. And please do. The resistance from you is very important to be able to make my point correctly today. So we have 1.5 hours, and I would like to start with this example of a worm. This worm has got 308 nerve cells, and these nerve cells are all throughout his body. So there's no centralized nervous system, which you could call a brain. But I have a question for the audience. Who thinks you could teach this worm a trick? Yes, an enthusiastic participant. How are you going to teach a worm a trick?
Probably by an incentive of food or some kind.
Food incentive. They are food incentive. They are rewarding. Very good. Excellent. And next to rewards, what else can you do?
Punishment.
Punish a worm, exactly, with like an electrical shock, for example. So, and besides that, you probably need a lot of repetitions before the worm will learn something. But they actually tried this. Even the Dutch common regenworm, you can take it out the ground outside. The scientists, the neuroscientists, trying to study how humans make decisions, they put this worm inside glass straws. You could take a left, and he would get some food as a reward. And on the other side, you would punish the worm with a small electrical shock. And if you shock the worm 100 times, then after that, statistically seen, the worm takes the right route more often. So even a ringworm can learn something new. But this is C. elegans, and C. elegans is much more amazing than the Dutch common ringworm. So you can see the maze, and the maze is about the size of a computer chip, and it's carved in glass. And that's the laboratory of this group of neuroscientists. And what they found is if you place the food at the same location inside the maze, what they observed is that these worms, they find the food in the maze faster and faster and faster. And this was like a bomb in neuroscience. How can such a simple, rudimentary nervous system perform such amazingly complex tasks? Remembering where the food is, orientating yourself through a maze. So one of these researchers said, that's truly amazing. So where is this knowledge going to be inside this neural network inside his body? So he decided to cut the trained worms in half. Don't worry, the other worm will grow a new head and the other one will grow a new ass. But what's funny is that only one worm knows how to find the way through the maze. And one of the last research I found from this group is that they had a bunch of trained worms and they grinded up these trained worms. They didn't survive. And then fed them to a new group of untrained worms. And they showed that these untrained worms, after eating these worms, were faster at finding the food in the maze. So the practical implication of this last part is a bit difficult to translate to human things. But I do have two important points with just this first example. So the first thing I'd like to show you is that really complex behavior, remembering where your food is, orientating yourself through a maze, without thinking. This worm is not reflecting on its own actions. And what I want you to realize is that complex behavior is not always, or even not often, the result of deliberations, of conscious deliberations, of rationality. So that's the first part. I'm going to show you a lot of examples in humans as well. Yes?
May I interrupt you? So actually you're saying that storing knowledge, even within this worm, is something like a substance instead of software.
Instead of software.
Instead
Interesting, yeah.
Instead of thoughts, deliberations.
I think it's like software, really software-like. And they're building these artificial brains with neural nets. And it's very much similar to how neural nets operate. What I want to show you in this next 1.5 hours is that we humans are not that different from this worm and how we make decisions. But that's een hinkstapsprong. I'll get there. Yeah. So the first part is really complex behavior in the absence of thought. No reflections, no deliberations. The second part is, even in this rudimentary nervous system, the start, the basis of a nervous system, you can already see that the nervous system is dedicated to learning to avoid negative stimuli, like an electrical shock. And more importantly, it's dedicated at finding rewards and repeating behavior that leads to rewards. So that's the second fundamental point I would like to make with this first slide. So now I'm going to take you a few million years later in evolution. And now we have a rat here. And these researchers, they drilled a tiny hole inside the skull of this rat, and they placed an electrode on his nucleus accumbens. And the nucleus accumbens, maybe you've probably never heard of it, but it's the brain's reward center. It's the brain's motivator. This is called the Skinner box. What they did is, inside the cage, there's a small handle here. If he presses this bar, he is able to activate the electrode in his own reward center. So there were some lights here signaling whether the battery was connected to the bar. So to put simply, the rat has got a happy button inside his cage. And what you notice is, as soon as this light is switched on, so the rats realize that the happy button is active, they all do that, and within 1 second, they run to the happy button inside the cage, start pressing the happy button like a maniac, and most of them don't stop pressing their happy buttons until they drop down from exhaustion. So happy, 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 they keep going on. And in a more extreme experiment, they build a cage for these rats, and they put the food over here, put the rat here, and in the middle, who's got one of these rackets with which you can electrocute mosquitoes in midair? Nice, right? They put the racket in the middle, so now there are electric wires. He has to jump the electric wires to get to the food. This is not my experiment, by the way, so okay. In this situation, 95% of the rats are too afraid to jump the electric wires to get to the food, and as a consequence, you can imagine what will happen. So,
Battery is going to die. Sorry, that's a
okay, that's a good point, yes. Oh. Sorry about that. So in this situation, 95% of the rats are too afraid to jump the electric wires to get to the food. However, if you place a trained rat who's trained to operate his own happy button inside this situation, and you would add another happy button at the end of the cage, as soon as the light is switched on, 100% of the rats, and within 1 second, they will jump the electric wires, jump over their food, and start pressing their own happy button here again until they drop down from exhaustion. So this is just something to explain to you the dominant factor that this reward center plays inside the brain in terms of motivation. So getting to your food is not enough, but if you would be able to have a shortcut and activate your own reward center, it's a shortcut for behavior. So you just start running inside a loop. Okay. So if you look at the evolution of the brain, here we have a fish brain, a reptile brain, and a bird brain. But you have to realize that this is 300 million years of evolution. And what do we see happening in the structures of the brain? Not a lot, right? So then we have a rat brain, and I'm about to show you a monkey brain in the next slide. And then we have the human brain. But this part, I say it's only, but in evolutionary terms, it's only 30 million years of evolution. So 1/10 of this part. And what you see happening is that this neocortex, the newer part of the brain, is starting to grow at a fantastic rate. And what's interesting about evolution, evolution decided not to throw away all these ancient parts, but it decided rather to build more complex layers on top of more ancient layers. So if I would be able to lift up this neocortex from the brainstem, what we find underneath is what we still like to call our reptilian complex, the ancient part of our brain. And for example, this nucleus accumbens, the reward center, it's central in this ancient part of the brain, but also our amygdala, our emotional arousal, the hippocampus for orientation and memory. And we find these structures, these brain structures, in kind of similar shape. We can recognize them still in the brain of frogs. So we estimate these parts of our brain to be about 500 million years old. So evolution decided that we have two types of neural systems. On the one hand, we have the more modern brain. It's the voice inside your head. It can plan, it can potentially be reasonable. And we have our ancient brain. And these two brains are competing to produce behavior, but there's something weird about it, because everything what happens in our ancient brain is outside of our awareness and mostly outside of our control. But this configuration of systems leads to something really interesting. So as humans, we feel that we are in control of our behavior. But this is kind of the illusion of rationality. So if this ancient part of the brain is producing a lot of behavior, but we don't notice anything about its influence, we automatically tend to overestimate the role of this more conscious brain, the voice inside your head. And we all feel that's our soul, that's my identity, and that's the one who's in control of my life, and that's the one who's making decisions. Not really. Okay. In this last animal example, and then we'll really start to talk about human and persuasion, don't worry. This is research by Frans de Waal. He wrote a book called Chimpanzee Politics. I advise it if you want to understand human behavior. But in this situation, there are two monkeys. And the monkey performs a little simple trick, and it receives a slice of cucumber for the trick. And then the other monkey, he does the same trick, However, the other monkey receives a grape for the same trick. And the first monkey sees that. Now I want to show you this video clip, and I want to pay you specific attention about what we're talking about. Which part of behavior is driven reflexively, like automatically, written in your DNA, and which part is deliberations, like humans think. Let's see. Wait a minute.
Get a grape and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. He gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again.
Yeah, it's a really funny clip, but it's really funny probably because we recognize our own behavior, right? And the big question here, it's not fair, but a concept such as fair, I showed this clip to a philosopher and he didn't believe it. No, this monkey is trained to react in this kind of way and to trick you into thinking concepts like fairness. Fairness is really something about deliberations and you need a conscious mind. No way. These simple monkeys, these are not chimpanzees. They already have concepts such as fair. And this monkey is able to take the perspective of the other monkey. And what's really amazing, if you continue this experiment, some of the monkeys on this side, they will refuse the grape because they see that the other monkey is getting frustrated. So this type of empathic responses and taking other monkeys' feelings into account, even these types of cognitions are not strictly for humans. So far the part about humans and understanding which parts of our decisions are driven by rationality. So I'm now going to show you the most boring slide of today's talk, but it's also the most important slide, so bear with me. We used to talk about the brain in terms of affective, emotion processes, feelings, and thought, cognition. And we say the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, this is a bunch of nonsense. It's not really true. And then we used to think, well, if people make a decision and the decision is not rational, it's not based on reason, it's because they're driven by emotions. Okay, maybe that's true, but it's not where the magic happens. It's not where the counterintuitive findings are coming from. So yes, we have thoughts and feelings, but besides that, there's another distinction in brain processing. And this is based on Daniel Kahneman, who has read Thinking Fast and Slow. Okay, it's a really interesting book. Like, he's a Nobel Prize winner in economics, and he has a background in psychology. So he's the one who definitely threw Homo economicus overboard and replaced it with a new model of brain processes. He says there's two types of neural processes. You have controlled processes, which he refers to as system 2, and automatic processes are our ancient brain, system 1. So the modern brain, this shouldn't be a surprise, is serial. So if I would ask you to make a calculation, you can only make one calculation at a time. So it has very limited capacity. Depending on your IQ, of course, when you start calculating, you have to put in some effort. And you experience effort when you're calculating, your concentration. They are evoked deliberately, so you have control over these processes. Am I going to make a calculation now, or am I going to do it in 1 minute? And very important, good introspective access. So once you have made a calculation, I could ask you to recall the different steps you had to take before you could get to the answer. Introspection in thought processes. When you look at automatic processes, or system 1, it's almost completely the opposite. So at this moment, when you are trying to follow my presentation, inside your brain, in the automatic processes, there's an orchestra of neural mechanisms working in parallel, so working with the same information at the same moment and trying to make internally a representation of reality. So the information from your eyes, from your ears, from all your senses is bind together in your brain and it builds a picture. It makes a recreation of reality. But you have to understand this reality inside your mind, the one that we're looking at right now, is decoupled from actual reality. It's a construction from your brain. But this is effortless. I'm not saying that following my presentation is going to be effortless, but whenever these processes kick in or stop working, you don't notice any feelings of effort. So they're very energy efficient. They are reflexive, so you have no control over them. They start themselves, stop themselves, and very important, there's no introspective access. What does this mean for when humans try to describe their own motivation why they performed or made a certain decision? Why did you decide to follow the workshop here today? Which part of your brain is going to give an answer? The control processes, right? So once we start and try explain our own behavior, we can only rely on these types of processes because we don't have any feelings for effort. We don't notice that these processes are working and they have influence on our behavior. So this configuration is what causes the illusion of rationality and the illusion that we are very much in control of our behavior. Maybe this is a good moment to give you an example of how marketers can make mistakes. So if you try to be persuasive, you can ask people who made the right decision earlier, why did you decide to go to our brand? What was it that motivated you to go to our insurance brand? And in this case, these marketers decided that in the Netherlands, each year in December, you have the opportunity to switch brands in insurances. So these marketers thought, this is going to be brilliant. What we're going to do now is we're going to ask everybody that switched to our brand, why did you decide to go to our brand? So people, they start to fabricate intelligent sounding stories in an effort to reflect their motivation. And what they found was that there were 12 answers that they heard most often. And they translated these 12 answers into USPs for their landing page. So now they thought we're going to be really persuasive because we did great research and we have these 12 USPs that speak to almost everybody. So this was their landing page now. What do you think about using 12 arguments to persuade somebody? You're shaking no.
Too many.
It's too many. But why?
Overload of information.
And what's going to happen if you overload?
Discard.
Zone out. Discard it.
You discard a lot, I think.
Mm-hmm.
You can do everything well.
But you think it would even hurt the conversions?
It makes it too good to be true, maybe. That's the way I think I react to something like that.
Paradox of choice also. There's too many points to follow.
Paradox of choice. That's really like if you ask somebody to sample 3 types of jam, they're very much likely to buy one. But if you sample somebody 9 samples of jam, the sales goes down all of a sudden. So this is, we always say that we want a lot of choice, and when you test it in reality, it's not true. People do not want that much choice because they do not like a lot of clutter inside their brain. So in this case, it was by online dialogue, and he said, we're going to add some different versions next to this website. So this is version 0, and now we're going to build A, B, C, and D. And what we're going to do is we're going to randomly assign these USPs to these different websites. So they have a lot of traffic, and each consumer that enters the website is directed at this version, at a random order. So in this case, now they only used 3 USPs. And what they noticed is by simply leaving 8 good arguments for people to join your brand, by leaving these out, the conversion was already 25% higher. So 25% more people decide, yes, I want to buy this brand. I'm going for this brand. In the next round, they said, well, we have 25% higher, but we know another trick. And what we can do is we're going to swap these black bullets and change them into green checker marks. And conversion was 35% higher by using green checker marks instead of black bullets. So it's amazingly more effective. And try to realize from a brand perspective about being persuasive, try to make a website so cool that you're going to end up with 35% higher conversions. It's going to be very, very challenging. But if you understand something about how the brain reflexively processes information, you can learn from this by understanding how you should package information so it can become persuasive. And also in this case, imagine if those same group of marketers would then again next year ask all those consumers, why did you decide to go to our brand? You think one of them is going to say, well, there was only 3 USPs, very easy, and the green checker boxes, yeah, that did it for me. Probably not. So also in this case, what made this landing page persuasive? People who have been persuaded by it cannot recall and cannot accurately name what it was that triggered this persuasiveness in this website. Okay, everybody gets this part, this model? Okay, I'm going to continue. So one of the techniques about explaining the difference in automatic processing and how fast this works is by using visual illusions. So visual illusions is something really intriguing for me. So this is in Leiden in Museum Boerhaave. It's a really famous visual illusion, and I've got a short video clip to explain how it works. It's really frustrating, right? So you look at this, and I clearly see that this part is much lighter than that one, but they're exactly the same color. So how does this work? Maybe if I do this already, you can see a lot of the illusion disappears. So your brain starts to build a reconstruction, but from all this data, all this incoming data, the brain plays tricks with you. So it takes about 200 to 150 milliseconds before you have built this internal representation of reality. And what do we see? It's not really reality. So the brain is changing information for you. There was a really crazy illusion just this week. So this is gray, right? There's absolutely nothing red inside this part, right? But when I add some strawberries, you see the difference? It's gray, but when you add context of strawberries, and this of course is the same line, your brain realizes that, and it knows that strawberries are red. But in this case, they put a filter over the entire picture, and your brain starts to make intelligent reconstructions. And this happens super fast, without any feelings of effort. So the brain is being really clever, it's helping you to interpret reality, but there are a lot of biases that occur through these processes. So before we become completely aware of the picture that we're looking at, your brain has changed it. Yes? Okay. So one of the techniques we use inside our lab, and this visual illusion, you should just use it as a metaphor for the way the brain processes and values incoming information also at other levels. So in this case, it's a really simple Jip and Janneke neuroscience experiment where they make use of EEG. And we also use EEG in our own lab. EEG is you get a head cap with a bunch of electrodes. And the big benefit of this technique is that you can measure per millisecond how much attention the brain has for a certain stimulus, for example. So I already told you, once your eyes start working with information, and in this case, it was men and women. They were hooked up to the brain recording machine, and they were placed in front of a TV screen. And on the screen, in a random order, they presented shoes and motorcycles. So it takes about 300 milliseconds before your brain, your visual information is translated into a representation of reality. And then you can use the top layer of your brain to start reflecting on this picture and say, this is a shoe. That's a motorcycle. And if you're fast, it takes you about 280 milliseconds. And on average, people can answer within 300 milliseconds. Okay, impressive. But once you start measuring with EEG, you see something really interesting. Because it shows that men and women women differ a lot. It showed that not after 300 milliseconds do we realize what we're looking at, but after 120 milliseconds the first differences already occur, which were very prominent at 130 milliseconds, meaning that about halfway through the process of being conscious of what you're looking at, all women brain showed more attention for shoes, and from 20 men, 19 men had more attention for motorcycles. There was one guy with more attention for shoes, but the paper doesn't mention anything about him, so I'll keep going on with my point. The point is, of course, these are culturally learned objects. It's not like a snake or a spider that has evolutionary relevance. And what you see is the brain, once you do things a lot, these processes also become automatic. And what's really interesting is that the brain recognizes these pictures at a very early process, and again, the brain starts to make decisions for you. Even before you can consciously make deliberations, the brain decided, for women at least, that shoes are more important. Even before you are aware. So keep this effect in mind, because now I'm going to demonstrate this effect to you here, the audience. Okay. In a second, I'm going to show you two pictures. These are US congressional election candidates. And they're runner-up candidates, so they're competing one another. So they spend months and millions and try to talk about rational arguments, trying to be persuasive. And we're going to do an election here as well, but we're going to do an election in half a second. So I'm going to show these two pictures to you, and I want you to focus on the competence from their faces. So which of the two persons is the more competent, do you think? And you only have half a second to rate the competence of two faces. And then we're going to do an election here and see whether you're able to predict the winner of the election outcome. Let's see. You ready? Okay, that was fast, right? Who thinks that person is the more competent? Who thinks that person is the more competent? So that's an overwhelming majority. In half a second, interestingly enough, you reach a consensus of about 80% about which of the two persons is the more competent, which is weird because we obviously we don't judge each other based on appearances, right? Yeah. Well, what would be really interesting to realize is that you also selected the winner of this election outcome correctly. So they spent millions and months for this election, and you only spent half a second and just went with your gut feel, and you predicted this outcome correctly. So I have another one. I'm going to try to do it even faster. Are you ready? Okay. Yeah. Who thinks that person is the more competent? Really? Who thinks that person is the more competent? So you have consensus of 95% and maybe a quarter of a second. When I took the pictures away, everybody was laughing. Yeah, how can they decide? And it turns out in 50 milliseconds, we can see whether it's a woman or a man, whether he's attractive, competence, trustworthiness. So this automatic processing of faces is super fast. But what's really shocking is that you again correctly predicted the outcome of these elections. So in 2005, they did a huge investigation, and here they used 1 second, and in 1 second, in a follow-up study, they've been able to reduce this 1 second to just 100 milliseconds without losing any accuracy. And in 100 milliseconds, here we, with a group in the Netherlands, who've never seen these political candidates before, we can correctly predict US electional outcomes more than 70% of the time correctly.
So we could have seen Trump coming.
We could have seen Trump coming, definitely, yes. And what's really weird is they increase the length of your decision. So now you're not looking 1 second, but you have 5 seconds. And what do you think happens with the accuracy if you have 5 seconds? It goes down, right? because then your top layer starts to add a layer of conscious deliberations. And yeah, what do they really mean? And in 100 milliseconds, it really means at the moment when you're selecting a candidate, your gut feel is very critical. And you would want to believe that once we start selecting leaders who make important decisions in your country, that it would be kind of more a rational process, right? But yeah, I think last year proven that it's not really a rational process after all. They did a test in Switzerland. And little kids, 5 years old, are playing this strategic board game, and halfway through the game, the experimenter walks up to the table and asks this little kid, he says, well, here you have a ship, and with this ship, you're gonna have to attack this city. But you still have to choose a captain for your boat. So the experimenter shows 2 pictures, and these are election candidates from the French elections, so little kids in Switzerland, never seen them before. And amazingly, kids 5 years old show exactly the same preferences as you just did. And kids 5 years old in Switzerland predict election outcomes in France with these types of accuracies. And it's also a very universal effect. And again, I would like to ask you yourself, the last time you voted for a particular candidate, why did you select this candidate? So inside your mind, this top layer is creating an intelligent sounding story at the moment. But how much of that is true? So we have a limited ability to reflect on what actually drives our decisions. And let's do a little test. A quarter of a second, you can reach a consensus of about 80–90% was right with the last candidate. What is it in how the face is built that triggers this preference, do you think? Let's start shouting some things. Symmetry. Symmetry means that you have a strong set of genes, and during your development, you're not bothered by a lot of parasites because of the genes, and then you grow up to be very symmetrical. We think it's attractive, but not necessarily competent. It was a marginal factor. Yeah. The jawline. It needs to be really big, right? Like in those cartoons that the leaders always have, like a square. Oh, okay. Smiling. It gives some masculinity, but for competence, it's still a marginal factor.
Size of the mouth.
In the forehead.
The size of the mouth?
Yeah.
Brain.
Why are you saying this?
Research about that they actually researched that the bigger the mouth actually is when more people see somebody as leader or competent.
Really? Well, we can stop right here because it is an important factor. So they've been investigating this for years now, and there was this team from the US, and they found that there was a guy who used to work with chimpanzees, and he said, well, in chimpanzees, if you want to be the alpha male, you need to have the biggest fangs, but you also need a very big mouth to show these fangs. I said, well, big mouth, that's something we can test, right? So they took pictures of men and used Photoshop to increase mouth size and decrease mouth size, and yes, it works. So if the mouth becomes too small, we don't think it's a very successful person. And we were a bit shocked by this study, because what they did next is they took the CEOs of the Fortune 500 companies from the US, took their pictures, measured their mouth size in relation to the size of their head. So if you have an enormous head, it doesn't help if you have a big mouth. But they found that, yes, the bigger the mouth of the CEO, the more successful people think he is, and the better the organization performs in terms of financial results. And that's really weird, right? So we did a test here in the Dutch politicians. So this is their mouth size, and this is perceived success. So I don't know how data savvy you are, but yeah, the closer these dots are to this line, the stronger the effect is. So it was a very significant effect. We did a follow-up study now as well, where we increased and decreased the mouth size of Mark Rutte and other men, and it does work. So we get a significant result. So even for people that you know, if you're looking at their picture and we create 10% bigger mouth, you're going to think he's slightly more successful than without this increase in mouth size. And no, it's not. He does a lot of this, but there people send me pictures where it's huge. Yeah, yeah. Believe me. Yeah. No one has a bigger mouth than. When you look at this sample, you can see that the guys at the bottom, well, not so very successful, their mouth sizes are a lot smaller than the guys who are in the top row. And once you notice this effect, you can see it, but it's really weird that nobody has ever realized that mouth size is a very important factor in perceived success in men. Okay.
Mark Rutte is not even there.
Sorry, yeah? He's not in this. It's a follow-up study that we did. It's only with men. The success of women is not related to the size of their mouth. But
Are they actually practicing it or not in the elections? Is it already used in
no, we're gonna do a press thing in a few days. So we're still testing the significance of this next data set. And every man, they also want to know immediately how about my mouth size. So my mouth size was a bit disappointing. So there's some ceiling effect in my career probably somewhere. So they gave me a mouth stretcher for my birthday. But we're also developing an app for that. So soon you can upload your picture and we'll tell you against a benchmark how successful you're going to be based on your mouth size. Our aim is, of course, to get thousands of profiles from LinkedIn, so we know what kind of job they're doing, and we're going to use all types of machine learning techniques to understand what it is in a face that triggers this successful feeling. So,
You can also Photoshop.
yes, you can also Photoshop. Yes, definitely. If you go to your LinkedIn profile, make it a little bit bigger, and you get more business. Okay. So persuasiveness can be in things that are completely outside of our awareness. And once we start reflect on our motivation, we are not very accurate. And this also has an effect that it's very difficult to predict your own behavior in a given situation. So let's do a little thought experiment, yes? Imagine you're sitting at home watching TV and the doorbell rings. So you walk up to the door and there's a lady and she's asking for a donation for a good cause. In this case, it's a research foundation into heart disease, the Hartstichting. But this person is wearing a polo, a good quality polo. What would it matter for the amount of money that you would donate to the Hartstichting, whether this polo also has an expensive Lacoste logo on there? What would happen to the amount of money that you would donate?
It goes down.
You would donate a smaller amount of money because of the Lacoste. Can you?
Explain?
Yeah.
I think I would feel less sorry. Maybe.
Buy a sweater of your money.
Yeah, sympathy factor, yeah.
So you have less sympathy for people with Lacoste shirts, maybe. Interesting. Yeah. This is, of course, a post-rationalization, of course, but maybe somebody has another view on.
I think the reference point goes up somehow.
The reference point goes up. So what would happen to your amount?
My amount, that depends. I have to come down all the way. So I have to get back to get the money. So I don't know, but I think when the reference point, it's just like paying for a beer on a beach is different than paying for a beer in a supermarket. It's like the reference point goes up, so probably the amount will go up.
You would pay a higher amount. He also dresses for success. Maybe you notice that.
Dresses for success.
They tested this. This is a study in Tilburg a few years ago. There were 4 female students who did the collecting, and they swapped polo every now and then. There are different demographic areas. They didn't realize what the purpose of the study was, so nobody realized that sometimes there was a Lacoste logo, sometimes not. However, when the Lacoste logo is present, we, all together, we double the amount. So you pay twice as much money as soon as you see the logo.
For the Hartstichting.
For the Hartstichting, yes. And then again, in this case, imagine if you could go back and ask for a person, yes sir, you just donated €6. Can you explain why you decided to donate €6? Do you think this guy is going to say, well, First I had €3, went up to the door, saw the Lacoste logo, went back. No way, right? He probably doesn't even recall seeing the Lacoste logo, but this bottom layer of your brain, this automatic part, it does something like you described. It sees the logo and says, hey, this guy is spending money on nonsense, so he's signaling success, signaling conspicuous consumption, so he's signaling he's got access to resources. And again, from an evolutionary reason, probably, yeah, we show compliance behavior to people who signal that they are spending money. They signal that they're being successful. And of course, yeah, we want a little bit of that share, so we want him to like us. That's basically what's happening here. So they also did a study where they built resumes. They wrote resumes. So this is his education, this is his experience. He worked for these types of companies. This is his psychological profile. And the picture on the resume. And on this picture, he was wearing a Lacoste polo. And half the human resource managers, they received the same resume, but they took the Lacoste logo away with Photoshop. And then asked these human resource managers, if you would hire this person in your organization, how much money do you think he should make based on this resume? And if you're wearing a Lacoste polo, you're going to make about 20% higher wages than without the Lacoste logo. Yes. Okay, we're going to look at persuasiveness in a different context. So a very simple question. Imagine if you would be interested in a subscription for The Economist. However, there are 3 options. So you can get the online subscription for $59. You can get The Economist printed subscription. Yeah, you get a paper, and it's more expensive. You get $125. Hey, but wait a minute. You can get the printed and online subscription also for $125. That makes me curious. Who would go for option number 1? Option number 2? There's not a very Dutch option to choose. 1 person? Yeah. And who would go then for the last option? Would see some hands. That's the vast majority, right? So for the same price, you wouldn't want the online as well, or?
No, because I don't read it.
Okay. So this is a study by Dan Ariely, and he's one of the famous people in this field about persuasion, understanding non-conscious part of the brain. And he saw this ad, so he phoned The Economist and said, what's up with your ad? Because these are the same price, but you get a lot more for this option. Why is that? Did you build it with some idea in your mind? And they couldn't tell him. So they sent it to that office, and nobody really had an idea why this ad was placed like this. So he tested this with 200 MIT students. So it's the brain future of the planet. So what we can do now is look at your score and compare it to the guys of MIT, right? Let's see what happens. So if you give people these 3 options, this is how they choose. It's kind of similar. At MIT, they do want the online option there as well. All right. So we have a small group of people who want the first option. Nobody wants the second option. And the last option is by far the most attractive option, right? That means the middle option almost it shouldn't be there. Nobody chooses this option.
No, it helps you to make the more expensive choice.
Oh, again, this is interesting. So,
if you have the 2-feature option for the same price,
yes,
you will definitely go for that one. If you leave the one in the middle out, you say, well, it's the double amount of money, then I'll go just for online.
yeah. And what option did you choose?
I chose the bottom one.
Okay. So what's interesting here is there's a persuasion trick, and you fell for it.
Yeah.
And then we start talking about it, and then you start realizing, hey, that's really weird, because this option is only attractive because this useless option is placed in the middle. Yeah. So the weird thing is, if you give people only 2 options, this is how they choose. That's a landslide of a difference. Now, all of a sudden, 70% thinks the first option is the best. So here again, you show that it doesn't need a lot of emotions or a pretty lady or expensive brands. Even in just really dry information, our brain has got a lot of difficulty in choosing options that bring you the highest utility. So we can be easily persuaded by things that we're not really aware of. And we do this also for organizations. This technique is called the decoy effect, asymmetric dominance, and they also called adding an ugly brother to the equation. That has a reason. So this is also by Dan Ariely. He showed that he took a frame and placed faces of men in these frames. So here you have, for example, Jantje. And next to Jantje, we have Pietje. And then he asked ladies, which one is more attractive? Is it Jantje or is it Pietje? And then they say, well, Pietje is more attractive to Jantje than Jantje. Okay, says Dan Ariely. So now we're going to add an ugly brother to the equation to see what happens. So they took a Photoshop of Jantje and used Photoshop, maybe make him a little bit less symmetrical, for example. So he very much looks like Jantje, but he's obviously less attractive. So when he's not here, Pietje is more attractive, but when you add his ugly brother to the equation, all of a sudden they think Jantje is more attractive than Pietje. So it's not about numbers or anything. It's as soon as two options are really similar, but one is obviously superior, the other options just lose their attractiveness. And the most practical implication is, of course, if you're going for a drink tonight, call somebody that looks a lot like you, but slightly less, and that will give you the best. Yeah. And says Dan Ariely, if somebody calls you to hang out tonight, maybe you know now what's going on, definitely. Okay, but persuasiveness. So at this last option,
How many can you do this then? How many ugly friends do you need? I have just a choice of 3, but can you put more in there? If you offer products, can you put?
it's a good question. It's not really been tested well how far you can stretch this. But in practice, usually our customers, they have 2 options. They say this one has much better customer lifetime value, margins. How can we make consumers choose this one? So that's when we add an ugly brother. For example, in an online environment, the conversion on this page remains the same, but you can generally make a giant shift of about 70% of one option to the more preferred option. Yeah. It's a very robust effect. So, but when you're reading this, or when I'm explaining you these different options, at this last option, you feel some kind of a jolt. You say, well, that's the option that I want. That's a good option, right? But what happens inside your brain at the moment when you decide this is a good option? So this is, was studied in 2007. 30 students in the US were paid $30. So they received an amount of $30, and they were asked to participate in a brain scanning shopper session. So they were lying inside a brain scanner. They received $30 and they could buy products. So they were actually purchasing these products. And as soon as they got out of the scanner, they would get the products. So for example, lying inside, then a box of chocolate appears. Nice, chocolate. I like chocolate. So you have 4 seconds to look at a box of chocolates, but then the price appears. So $7. $7 for a box of chocolates. That's quite a large amount. And then you have 4 seconds to make up your mind, and a 2-second break, and then the next product appears. And this continued for like 1.5 hours. And there was one student, he didn't buy anything, so he went home with $30. I'm not sure whether he really understood the task, but that's not important.
Yeah, the hangover.
What you can do with a brain scanner is each time when somebody says, yes, I want it, versus no, I do not want this product, you can use the brain scanner to calculate back inside his brain which part of the brain is making these buying decisions. And we already talked about reward processing in the beginning with the worm, and then we talked about the red brain. And what was this part again in his brain, that the reward center? Sorry?
Happiness center.
The happy center, yeah, exactly. The nucleus accumbens. I was looking for that word actually, but that was. Okay. At the moment when people say, yes, I want this product and I'm going to buy it, nucleus accumbens, here in the center of our ancient brain. That's mostly in control of our buying decisions. So when you have more activity in the reward center, the bigger the chance is that people say, yes, I'm going to buy this product. So then the price appears, and then the insula responds. And the higher the price, the more activity we see in the insula. And what's really interesting, if you use a mathematical model in these neural activations, you can get quite a way in predicting what people would buy. And you would learn more information than only asking people, what do you think is a nice product and what do you think is a reasonable price? So you can retrieve hidden information in the brain about motivation. This medial prefrontal cortex, that's the more controlled functions that's over here. So usually if these two are in equilibrance, then you have to make more of a conscious decision. But it's fair to say that these more ancient emotional parts are very important drivers of our behavior. What's really interesting is that these same researchers who were working with this rat, they also had a female patient. And this is quite a controversial, kind of dark study they did, but I'll have a happy anecdote later. So I'm going to show you now a lady with a happy button. So this lady was severely depressed. She was desperate. And these researchers decided, you know what we're going to do? We're going to drill a hole in her skull and place an electrode in the reward center of the brain of the lady. And in the first part, she's lying in bed. And you can see a small light going on, meaning that their nucleus accumbens is being activated. And then you can look at their response. And in the next section, she has her own happy button here. And you can see her pressing the happy button, explaining what it feels like when she presses the happy button. Okay.
Almost looks like you're smiling a bit. Are you?
No.
He's implanted electrodes in the brains of chronically depressed patients, hoping to stimulate pleasurable sensations.
I guess I've cracked up all the way. I don't know.
I mean, that's the reason you're smiling.
Probably.
What are you laughing like? Oh, beautiful. What are you laughing
I
about?
don't know.
Huh? Not surprisingly, the experiments were controversial, but the electrodes did have an effect, especially near an area of the brain called the nucleus accumbens. Heath even let his patients control their own stimulation.
I find this button better.
That's number 2 button.
No. Find it better.
How do you feel?
I made a small joke yesterday. I don't know if I should repeat it or not.
I'd like to hear it.
I think it's worth repeating. What about the very deep electrode all the way down?
You're trying to tell me how it excites you, is that it?
Oh, I think it's somewhat of a sexy button.
Yeah. That's why you said it went all the way down.
I think it is somewhat of a sexy button. That's how she explains it when she's pressing this button. And I think we've been talking about this nucleus accumbens part a lot now. This is a good moment to activate the nucleus accumbens for everybody. Well, it's not going to be for everybody, but it is going to be my best effort that's still socially acceptable. Okay. And then we look for somebody who has a response to this. We have one. Yes. Can we do a little thought experiment? So imagine, I have 50 euros in my hand here. I could give it to you right now. Or we could agree that in 3 months from now, I'm going to put 80 euros in your account. What do you prefer right now?
I don't know, but I go for the 80 euros.
You're going for 80 euros. Okay, maybe there's a good resistance for his impulsiveness. Well, I'm curious about the rest then. Let's do some voting. Are there people who would rather want 50 euros right now? Let's see some hands. Oh, that's quite a lot, actually, a lot of women as well. So
Well attracted.
maybe you think that I don't trust Roeland, so I'd rather have my money right now just to be safe. Or maybe something else is going on, because I found this paper, and the title of this paper is "Do Pretty Women Inspire Men to Discount the Future?" And they describe a really interesting experiment. A group of men was invited, and there were two groups. And one group had a shoebox of pictures of phenomenally beautiful women, and the other group received a shoebox of averagely looking women. And the question was, take out these pictures and rate the beautiness of the women, the attractiveness. So this first group of men, they're really like, praise the Lord, guys, this is 9.5, and they're like 15 minutes. And the other group, men are not that critical, by the way, so they were, okay, that's a 7.5, the next one, that's an 8, okay. And then after 15 minutes, the experimenter walks up to the table and asks this person, thank you for participating in our studies the entire day. As a reward, we can give you 50 euros right now, or we can put 80 euros in your account in 3 months. And for some reason, well, I explain you the reason, they also tried it with the car appeal category, hot or not, it was not significant, but face attractiveness category, those guys who were looking at phenomenally beautiful women far more often decided to throw away 30 euros, and they want an instant gratification, they want 50 euros right now. So what's happening here?
Instant benefits.
Instant benefits, yes?
Well, for a long term, now I have to think about it. Why it's
They want to keep the rush.
What happens when men look at beautiful women? Sorry. The happy center becomes very active, yes.
And the next question is, do you want to continue keeping the happy center now, or do you want to get happy in 3 months again?
It sort of works like that. But what you see here is that our economic behavior, do we want 50 euros now or 80 euros in 3 months? We call this effect temporal discounting, and it's already a bit like 50-50. So it's really weird that we rather have 50 euros right now than 80 euros in 3 months. That's very relevant for how you share information internally in the organization. If you want to be persuasive, the benefits have to be translated and moved forward, like right after your decision. That's where you need benefits to become more persuasive. But what's really interesting is if you activate the nucleus accumbens with something totally irrelevant, we change as humans. So this more reflexive part of the brain becomes more dominant, and the more thinking part of your brain is sort of hijacked. And it tells us you become less critical and you're more prone for instant gratification. Why do you think they bake bread in the supermarket?
Smell.
The smell. So smelling food, just like looking at pretty pictures, it activates the reward centers, and you can measure the effect it has on the amount of products that people buy in the supermarket. So those supermarkets that smell like food, you sell a lot more products. Okay.
I don't know whether it's true, but selling your house and baking a pie or something helps.
Of course, yes, definitely.
It smells like home.
Yes.
And change the family pictures.
Yeah.
No family pictures, right.
Also not from beautiful women?
my daughters.
Okay, so let's see. Persuasive communication. This is an in-store activation. So in this supermarket, they have a shell here with chocolate. And they want to sell as much chocolate as possible. But they had 6 different creatives to try and achieve that. But let's do some testing here in the room. Who thinks you need this ad to sell a lot of chocolate? Let's see some hands, do some voting. Okay. Who thinks you need the couple in love? Only one? Yeah? Maybe this one. Yeah, quite popular. Or this one. Less popular. Maybe this one. Oh, it's quite a few. This is actually the winner here in the test. And you don't want to have a toothbrush, of course. That's where you activate barriers into purchasing. Yeah. if you ask this for a larger group of people, or you would ask even persuasive communication experts, usually they think this is the most popular one or this is the most popular one. But what's really interesting is that this is eventually the winner. And if you use a brain scanner and you trace activity in the reward center, here it is again, nucleus accumbens, you can create a pretty good solid prediction of which ad will give the highest conversion. And here again, if you ask people, they would choose the wrong one. So if they wouldn't use neuromarketing in this campaign, they would have lost 50% of the campaign volume by deciding ads based on your subjective opinion. So here you see that, yes, it is possible to retrieve information from the brain for the reward processing example. People are not very accurate in reflecting what happens in this part of the brain, but activity in these part of the brain are very predictive of behavior and response to these different ads. So why is this one more attractive? You decided this one, you have an idea why, or?
I was just comparing, and I don't know why, but I just thought that was the one.
Yeah.
Because it's a gift.
One for today, one for tomorrow.
I'm sorry, yeah?
Yeah, because it's a gift, so it's always nice to get something.
It's a gesture, right? Maybe it's, I'm not sure what it triggered, but it could be an idea. And this gesture, I want to explain something about it. I want to understand something about why is abstract information not persuasive, and what you can do with information to translate it into something that is persuasive. So, you're not all marketers, but imagine if this was an ad for smooth vanilla yogurt. Besides color, do you miss anything in this ad? A spoon. That was very fast. Is it okay now? You want a spoon on the other side? Really? Yes. So if you ask people for their buying intentions, if there's no spoon on a scale of 1 to 7, maybe 2, you put the spoon on the wrong side, 2.5, put the spoon on the correct side, it jumps. So maybe increase it up to 4. But why is it a higher buying intention if you put a spoon in there? You have a question?
Well, I'm left-handed, so
Yeah.
my preference
Yeah.
is
True, yes. But if you're a marketer,
yeah,
okay, yeah. But it's true. So they studied it. They asked people for their handedness. Left people show a higher buying intention when the spoon is on the left side. But only when you're selling to the left-handed organization for the then. Okay. Let's go one layer deeper, because this is very important for communication and trying to be persuasive. Is it simply that the spoon creates a buying intention, or is something else happening? So now we go a little bit more complex. Now we have
reward that you can start eating more or less with the spoon.
something else going on. Let me explain. Sorry?
See the context of use, so you know whether it's a yogurt or it's something else.
Yeah, I'll get there in a minute. Okay. So now we have two types of soup. We have a positive soup, which is tomato soup with assaggio cheese. That works well. It's a nice combination. Or you have tomato soup with cottage cheese. You don't put cottage cheese in tomato soup, so that's not really a nice combination. So here you have the mean purchase intention scale, and you see the positive soup scores a lot higher than the negative soup. But now is the clue. So this is the spoon on the wrong side with the nice soup, and the spoon on the right side, so you increase purchase intentions. But this is the nasty soup, spoon on the wrong side, spoon on the right side, and you decrease the purchase intentions. So what's really happening with the spoon in the soup effect, as we call it, the spoon in the soup, it creates a process of embodied mental simulations. So putting a spoon in there, it activates your imaginary part of your brain. So subconsciously, you're using your brain as a simulation machine, and you simulate taking a bite from the soup. And that's what creates the persuasion in this ad. So what you need to understand is that if you use abstract information in your communication to try and persuade somebody, you're talking to this top layer of the brain. So let's take an example of what's happening in the Mediterranean. It's not a nice example, but a lot of refugees, they take very dangerous boats, And we've all learned about the terrible statistics of how many people are drowning in the Mediterranean. And we know there's a lot of children there as well. Of course, it's painful to realize, but it doesn't have the same impact of one picture of a young guy at the streets of Turkey who was there dead. And the impact of this one picture is much greater than realizing all of these statistics about what's truly going on. And that's the difference of talking to this more modern brain in abstract information, in information that we think is highly persuasive, because it's very rational and you cannot counter-argument with these strong arguments. But a picture, something that you can imagine, is much more persuasive. So in terms of being persuasive in your communication, it means that you stay away from abstract information, specification-like information, and you translate this to benefits. And the benefits, a good USP, is something that you create a little movie of inside your brain. So if you're using a USP that you can create a little movie of, you're probably being more persuasive than just using abstract information. Okay. Is everybody still with me? Is it relevant? Do you need something else again? Okay, we continue. So this is a way to make use of this system in an online environment. But here they're trying to sell clothing. And of course, you know, if you're in an actual shop, you can touch the clothing and you can feel it, and whether you like the fabric. And they wanted to recreate something like that in an online environment. And they had two options. There was one option, a zooming option. So you can zoom into the dress and you can see the fabric to see if that would be something that would activate the more sensory and simulating parts of the brain. And there was also a rotating function. So you could push a button and you could see the model turning 360 degrees, showing you the dress. So if you look at the brain at the moment of encoding, simply looking at the website, pushing these different options, you can see all of this activity here. But in the next part, they ask these subjects while in the scanner, do you recall the orange dress and do you want to buy it? And at the moment when you ask this question, you can see that only in the rotation function, you can see the brain lighting up again purely based on memory. And you can see sensory activations, and the visual cortex became active, telling you that they're creating a simulation again of themselves looking at this dress. And this process also caused the nucleus accumbens to become more active, telling you that the rotating function was much more persuasive in creating these imaginary processes in the brain, and it creates desire for the product. Yes?
So it is more looking, rotating, that you can have more desire to buy
Yeah.
than assuming. So that function seems more important.
Exactly. So if you have a big online shop, in this case they could use a brain scan to understand, oh, am I going to do something really big with my website? You better use a rotation function, because it activates the imaginary sensory part of the brain and also the reward center more, just when you're trying to recall again that particular image. So there was one question before I got here, and that's how can you persuade people to use digital platforms, digital environments more? Well, there's one digital platform, well, there's a few, but if you look at Facebook, they've got the hang of it, I think. And look at Instagram. So why are these social media platforms becoming so big? Why are they so attractive that people even say that they are addicted to social media? Well, in this case, there were young people were invited in a brain scanning study, and these young people were also asked to send a lot of pictures, like 10 pictures, to the research group. And what they did is, inside the scanner, they rebuilt an Instagram platform. And here they showed pictures of the subjects who were lying inside the brain scanner, and every now and then a picture would emerge that they themselves gave to the research group. And then they manipulated the amount of likes underneath the picture. And here they showed the more likes you have on the picture, the more activity you see in the nucleus accumbens, again, the reward center of the brain. So you can say that a lot of this behavior driven towards social media is again reward-related behavior. So if you want to look at an online environment and make it appealing, you should have messages on this online platform and also people evaluating each other's messages, and that's what makes it intriguing for the brain. So we have a highly socially orientated brain, and what you see is as soon as people like something from you, it's like a shoulder pat in a social context. It's rewarding, and it creates a reinforcement of that behavior that led to the reward. So you're going back to this online environment to see if you can get another reward. But what was also interesting was not only receiving likes on your information, it was also that sharing information about yourself was also revealed to be intrinsically motivating. So it also activates reward centers of your brain. Another way to make something appealing is by using celebrities. But in this case, they used Cindy Crawford for Moulinex kitchen devices. Who think that's a good idea? See some hands? It was a pretty expensive contract.
I think it's not a good idea because it's distractive. That's what I've just found out, because I'm looking at her and not at the device.
Good point. Aha, yes. But that's a very good point. So when you ask people, does she actually eat something? Does she even know how to boil an egg? That's something that, so there's
But that would be more the rational approach, no?
it's a post-rationalization, yes, but somewhere inside you realize that her personality and maybe also the way she's posing is not really linked to a microwave. Okay.
I would think that the person that would buy this, they like her or not.
Yeah.
I like her, but I wouldn't buy it. So
It didn't work. So she was a famous model. You put her on anything and it will sell, but not kitchen appliances. Okay. So the CEO of Chrysler was a big fan of Celine Dion. So he asked Celine Dion, he paid her $15 million to place her in a Chrysler ad. You're already laughing, that's not very promising.
Very natural.
Yes. So who would think this is a good idea for... It actually sales went down when they were airing these ads. And I presented this at a huge conference in the States, and then this guy stood up, and he was the marketer from Chrysler who was doing the marketing intelligence in this period. So I was okay, I hope I'm saying it right. And he said, it was worse. It was not only when we were showing this ad that the Chrysler sales went down, the CD sales from Celine Dion were actually going up. So, but it was $15 million. It was cancelled halfway through because it doesn't work. So her image again, does she even have a driver's license? Does she know how to? So, but there are also very effective examples. Exactly. You need something, the image needs to be in line with the brand and the idea and the product. So if you use Tiger Woods for Nike, that was a multi-million-dollar contract. That also made him a very happy man. But also Nike, so it works. So they tested this also in a brain scanner. They asked participants to take part in a scanning session, and they showed, for example, Britney Spears, and 10 seconds later, they show jeans, and then there was another celebrity and another product, and sometimes the celebrity was in line with the product type, so Britney Spears and a jeans. Is that a match? It's a pretty good match, right? But what's interesting is the next day, they came back to the lab, and they asked these subjects, do you remember seeing this pair of jeans in the scanner? And once he was preceded by a celebrity whose image is in line with the product, the recall for the product became much higher. And what's also interesting is that the probability of them buying the product was also higher. So simply using a celebrity increases buying intention and increases recall, so it increases the persuasiveness. So what you have to realize is that you can again use something that is quite irrelevant to the product, and what happens in the brain is that there's a transfer of effect. So this effect we have for the celebrity is placed towards the product. Okay.
Can you also do this with group? So does it need to be a recognizable celebrity, or like cabin crew as cabin crew?
Well, if you don't recognize a celebrity, then there's no celebrity effect.
No, I mean
So it's
like
a really
like
primitive.
A glamorous, function kind of thing.
I'm sorry.
Like a glamorous function, so to say. Like if you do something like everybody wants to do that, like stewardess, for instance, or crew member. Does it also work if you do something like that?
But it needs to be a celebrity that's famous, that triggers something of value. That's something like the highest socio-economic status that we can imagine. And you borrow something from this value. So you simply put the two stimuli together, you do that often enough, and you see that the effect we have for the famous person dribbles down to the product.
Like Clooney guy with the coffee.
George Clooney, yes, definitely. But also Johnny the Mall for UPC. So you can measure the activation in this reward center if you compare it through different ads. But what's also very interesting is in the Netherlands, we have Frans Bauer. He was the most annoying celebrity that year in a commercial, so we do a lot of voting. But we also have the brain scans. This was a brilliant campaign and it brought a lot for the Nederlandse Energiemaatschappij. It was a very, very effective campaign. So in this case, you're looking at the persuasiveness of two different ads. And this is Evi van Landschot, so it's about banking and finance products. So this was nearly an identical animation, but the voiceover was different. So in one case, they said, because we have a good understanding of the risks, we are able to avoid surprises for you in the future. Which if you are interested in investment banking, that should be a very solid, very good argument. But is it persuasive? Because the other one said, we are different, and therefore we see opportunities. And this second one created a much better effect on these reward access and really overall. So the overall performance is much better if you focus on opportunities and things that people want. And one of the problems in being persuasive that also marketers have, but which you can also have internally in your organization, is that you're going to think a lot about why do people not do this thing that I want them to do. In this case, you're looking at barriers in behavior. What people want to do is they want to build a good argument that takes away the barrier effectively. But once you try and do this in communication, you often do the opposite. So you can try to argument your way out of a barrier, and all you do is you activate this barrier. It's about risk, so you're saying risk about investment banking. That's not a very persuasive way to get people to call you for their products.
Yeah, but if you're in, and then the risk of losing is normally stronger than winning something.
That's called loss aversion. Yeah.
Losing is stronger than winning.
That's true. It's very funny also, if we do a test here, I would bring something completely useless, like a paper press. And I would give it to half the audience. You would have it for 5 minutes, and I would ask you, how much would you pay for this paper press? And you might answer, well, I would pay €4.50 for it. And then we would ask another group that doesn't have the paper press, and we would ask them, well, how much would you pay for such a paper press? And they say, I don't want it, maybe pay 50 cents for it or something. And that's really weird. Just because you have it inside your hand, it creates loss aversion. So that's also a very interesting bias, definitely. But in this case, we tested multiple ads, and each ad that was focused on the return on investment of these banking products was not persuasive. How high you would set the return on investment, it didn't trigger these investment bankers that were inside the brain scan. And the best ad in this test was an ad that was saying, well, we were the first ones to be there at the table at Tesla when they started. And we were the first ones who were there at the 3D printing activity. And these kind of things, that was what was triggering and creating desires for investment banking to go with that party or to go with that brand. So do not activate barriers. Ask yourself, why do people want this? And these are usually better arguments. There's also a case from a big phone company, mobile phones. And they also want to create a lot of brand switching behavior. And they ask you, why do people don't switch between brands? And then they said, well, there's 3 reasons. One is I'm afraid I'm going to be unreachable for a moment. I might have to change my number, and I might get a double bill that month when I'm trying to change from brand. They said, okay, so now we're going to put a banner online effectively arguing against these 3 barriers. So they said, we have a switching service. You can keep your number. You're not going to get a double bill, and you can be reached at any moment. And what's interesting is that this message did exactly the opposite for people. So once you read this message, do not worry about 1, 2, 3. People start worrying about 1, 2, 3. They go to their own brand and they don't switch. So it has a counterintuitive effect. Yeah. See at the time. I have minutes left. In this case, we had a very big sample of commercials, and they were all more or less for the same product. And then we started counting the amount of important information in the ad, so the USP type of information. And there you show that this is the value axis in the brain, so this nucleus accumbens, orbitofrontal cortex. And what you see is when you have no rational information in your ad, the desire is the highest. And as soon as you start more complex information, you can see that these areas are less activated by more inhoudelijke, more information about these products. So again, you see a counterintuitive effect with sharing information.
And then if you go back to the case study from the USPs,
yes.
You not mention none at all, non-USPs instead of the 3.
Maybe it would work even better, yeah, that's possible. But what happens in communication is that you need to be aware that people tend to switch between these 2 modes, the more automatic part and the more rational part. And when you share a lot of information, automatically you're going to activate the more rational parts. And this rational part, when it becomes more active, you as a human being, you become more critical and you become less impulsive. So the opposite of looking at pretty women, for example, in this effect. So to wrap it up, if you want to learn more about persuasiveness, there's one important guy in this field. He's called Robert Cialdini. Has someone ever heard of him? Okay, yeah. He says he wrote a book, and it's still very popular at the moment because it's very practical. And he says there are 6 weapons of influence that you can use depending on the context. He says, for example, reciprocity is very important. So if you want something from a person, if you give them something first, they're more likely to return a favor for you. The other one is authority. So people who have authority are more persuasive. So for example, the Alpha.One caffeine shampoo that's aired right now, it's still this fake doctor talking in a white coat. And they've learned, yeah, if you're wearing a white coat, then yeah, probably he knows what he's talking about. So the information becomes more persuasive. Social proof. That's like a great example from Booking.com, for example. Social proof made Booking.com big. If you go to Booking.com and you're looking at a certain ad for a hotel room, it says a lot of reviews. So a lot of people have already been there. That makes it very persuasive. And the other factor is there are 9 other people currently looking at the same ad for this room. That's become, yeah, so what I'm doing is really good because other people are doing it as well. There are only 3 rooms available. And that's when you activate scarcity, which is also an important weapon of influence. So people are automatically attracted to things that are scarce. Commitment and consistency. People like to do something that they've already started. So for example, also, there were 2 groups of people that walked to a cinema to watch a movie. One group was walking for 30 minutes, and the other one was walking for 2 minutes. And then afterwards, if you ask them how high do they rate the movie, the group that walked 30 minutes, they're more happy with the movie than the group that only walked 2 minutes. Because they still have to explain to themselves why they were walking 30 minutes to get to the movie. So we like to have our behavior and our beliefs in line. And when they're not in line, we simply adjust our behavior, but most of the part we simply adjust our beliefs. So they are again in line with our behavior. So then I had all 6 of them. Liking people, people who we like, they are more persuasive to you. But this is our own model. So again, if you're working with persuasion and you have your message ready, we have this model for you that will help you to structure a bit what you're looking at in your communication. So here we have emotions, we have cognition, but we also have system 1 and system 2. So there are 4 areas of persuasion that you need to address. So the first part is cognition and system 2. So that's your modern brain that's thinking. And this part we call it convince. This is the USP section of your proposition. And the rule of thumb is never use more than 2 or 3 USPs. A good USP is a USP that gives you cognitive closing. So it gives you kind of the checkerboard effect. Okay, fine, I don't have to think about that anymore. A good USP is not a USP that triggers a lot of thought. Emotion and system 2, so your more conscious emotions, that's what we call appeal. You want something to be attractive, and one way to be effective in this quadrant is to use storytelling, for example. That's a way to become more appealing. It's also a very effective way that people will recall much more detail if you put information in a story form, because you can make a little movie out of it inside your brain. It's a much more appealing way to present information. But what I think where the magic really happens is in this bottom layer. First of all, the configuration of these systems causes the illusion that we all think this part is much more important, but this is actually where a lot of the magic happens. So in this part, we call it persuasion. And there are hundreds of cognitive biases that you should all learn about to try and become more effective in this area. So the economist example, the subscription part, that's an effect that's in this area of the brain. And the last part is trying to seduce people. So that's the nucleus accumbens, the reward processing of the brain. So if you are appealing, if you have some type of stimuli, some type of situation, a benefit that you can name that will activate nucleus accumbens, you know that people will become slightly more impulsive and maybe make the decision there at the point already. This is, of course, in a nutshell, and it's my task to try and create some awareness that decisions are often driven by factors that we are unaware of. And in any form of communication, whether you are a marketer, a salespeople, if you want to be persuasive, you need to learn to understand how this more automatic part of the brain processes the information to be more effective. So, is it ethical to use this type of information? I think it is unethical to not use this type of information. If your responsibility is to do communication, I think you should do your job accurately. And about half of this effect is in this area. For example, the Rabobank, they had a big campaign where they want to be maatschappelijk verantwoord. They want to show social responsibility. So they had this campaign and they had these pictures on their walls, on the shops, and it said 95% of the Dutch children do not eat enough vegetables and fruits. And everybody who's in persuasive communication, when they read this, they said, well, you're setting the norm just completely wrong. So people who read this, they go to McDonald's instead of buying vegetables and fruit. You're saying 95% of the children are not eating healthy, or nobody's eating healthy, and then they continue to not eat healthy. If you want to make this same line more persuasive, you better calculate 5% of the children is eating healthy. So that's maybe 275,000 children. So then you should say 275,000 children are on this moment already eating enough vegetables and fruits. And that's a much more persuasive message than simply saying, so you have a responsibility when you're in communication to do this right. And maybe a last anecdote. at the end of the study from Dan Ariely, remember the economist? So he phoned the economist back to show them the results of the study probably. And they said, yeah, it was a mistake. And we withdraw the ad as it was there. So from a commercial perspective, the finance guy was probably not very happy that they retracted the ad. So without being aware of it, you can do things in your communication that are actually barriers and can have a very counterintuitive effect. Thank you very much for your attention.
Roland, thank you very much. I found it very, very interesting.
Thank you.
So if anybody wants Roland's contact details, please let me know, or you can find him on LinkedIn, of course.
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting, and I learned a lot from it.
Great.
We have,
Nice.
I hope this convinces you to fly KLM more often.
I already do. I already do. Yeah, sure. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is anyone interested in the slides? I can share them, no problem.
Can I unmute you?